After the end of Roman rule in Britain, the commercial potting industry collapsed, and when pottery was revived by the Anglo-Saxons a couple of centuries later, it was very local and very homemade. The potter was just someone in the village who happened to be good at it. There was nothing as sophisticated as the potter's wheel, and the basic technique was the pinch pot, as demonstrated by this re-enactor. All the pounding so as to get the clay crystals lined up. He uses a shard of old pottery to help get the basic shape. He builds up the wall between his thumb and forefinger while leaving a very thick base. That is going to be paddled out later to create the characteristic rounded bottom of Saxon pots. Potting would typically be done during the slack time of the agricultural year, when the harvest was in and people had more time on their hands to start making the things they needed around the house. Once it's reached this stage, the pot is put aside to dry out a bit. However, the potter has a bit of a production line going and he can carry on with one he's been working on earlier. The tools he uses are just bits and pieces from round the home, like an old comb and a spare rib. This is where the rib comes in for the paddle and anvil technique. This is the same technique as a copper worker or an iron worker might use to beat out a bowl. He then turns the pot around with his hand inside to smooth the inner surface. Where a split has appeared in the rim, he makes a repair by forcing in a piece of damp clay. The pots would be fired on a clamped kiln, which is a very simple kiln consisting of a fire with the pots piled on top and then the whole thing covered in a pile of earth. It would be quite likely that splits would occur during the firing process, and in that case the pot might not be usable for cooking, but it could still be used for storage, for grain or flour, for example. Now he starts to bring out the belly. The curve he's putting into the pot is what gives it its strength. It also means that if it did crack in the firing, you could put a leather belt round the middle to keep it watertight. You could also put loops on it to hang a handle. Time for a bit more paddling. What's great about the rib is its curvature and the fact that it has a very smooth surface that sticks to the clay. He's not slapping the clay so much as patting and dragging. His main task now is to get rid of the weight in the base. The paddling also helps line up the clay particles. They are like tiny scales which slide over each other provided there is enough water in the clay. Once it dries out, they stop moving. It's because of this that handmade pots are stronger than modern moulded pots. When you just force clay into a mould, the pot has no intrinsic shape, and so you have to make it twice as thick to compensate. There are some cracks appearing, but he's not too worried, because they'll be forced back in when he puts the decoration on the pot. He also continues to smooth out the inside. You don't want to wear out your spoons because the pot has an uneven surface. Now for the decoration. Again, the tools he's using are just odds and ends, bits of bone, bits of wood. He's carved them and put a pretty pattern on them, just so they don't get used as kindling. He's not stamping it, but twisting it into the pot. The decoration is confined to the upper half, which has dried out enough to take it. The bottom of the pot is still rather soft. There is some debate as to whether the decoration on the pots is akin to the tablet weaving on people's sleeves and the hems of their skirts. They could even be tribal or clan markings like a Scottish tartan. He hopes the decoration will match up once he's got all the way round, but it's not too much of a problem since a person will only be looking at one side of the pot at a time. Finally, he takes a piece of well-polished antler to inscribe some lines. And the pot will now be ready for firing.